The outcomes we're looking for today are to connect the why to the data that we do collect for this indicator, explore and connect tiered intervention strategy resources to improve regular school attendance, and introduce some new resources that we have along the way. When we think about building connections between the data and the practice, this is really a pivotal video, and we'd like to take some time when you're listening to it, think about what's resonating with you and what surprises you.
Missing a day of school here, 2 days there may not seem like a big deal, but before long, those days add up and students aren't learning and they're struggling to keep up academically. 7 million children in the U.S. are considered chronically absent. That means missing 10% of the school year. States are beginning to take the problem seriously. For the last few years, schools in Cleveland, Ohio have made a big effort to encourage students to get to class every day. Special correspondent Kavita Cardoza with our partner Education Week found steady progress there, but also a long way to go. For our weekly segment, Making the Grade.
Good morning.
It's 7 o'clock in Cleveland, Ohio, and it's dark, cold, and snowing. The kind of day when it's difficult to get out the door.
Snow is real hard.
But Amanda Watkins prides herself on her daughter's perfect school attendance.
I can't miss a day. It's my perfect attendance, not even hers.
In Cleveland Public Schools, though, that kind of attendance record is not typical. A couple of years ago, school system leaders found more than half their 40,000 students were chronically absent. The problem starts as early as kindergarten.
Oh, careful now.
Principal Brittany Anderson at Patrick Henry's school greets every child as they come in.
How are you?
And their parents.
Well, we appreciate you all for making sure they're safe.
A lot of parents expressed that they didn't feel welcomed in the school in prior years.
So once a week, she sets out coffee and pastries.
And at first, it was just a way to get them in. But then the coffee clubs turned into a way for the parents to talk to the teachers. That way we can have these conversations with our parents without it feeling formal.
Diamond Godonsky has 3 kids in the school. She appreciates the warm welcome.
When, you come in and you see smiling, friendly faces with stuff to give to you, hot treats or whatever, it makes you feel good.
All right, SPO meeting tomorrow.
Anderson says building good relationships with parents makes it more likely they'll bring their children to school, even on a day like today.
If our scholars are not here, then they're not learning.
Students who miss a lot of school are more likely to drop out. Robert Balfans, a researcher with Johns Hopkins University, found a direct link between attendance and academics in Florida.
Essentially, we found that each additional day of missed schooling, students had 1 fewer point on the state test. So miss 10 days, lose 10 points, miss 15 days, lose 15 points.
But because schools used to track attendance differently, Balfan says until recently, states didn't even realize there was a problem.
Traditionally, schools have measured average daily attendance, which is how many kids on average are in the building on a given day. And except in the most extreme cases, that's almost always in the 90s. And we're hardwired to think 90A, good. But it turns out that you could have average daily attendance in the low 90s and still have a quarter of your kids missing a month or more of school.
Chronic absenteeism affects all students, says Hedy Chang with the nonprofit Attendance Works.
A teacher now is faced with the choice of repeating lessons or keeping going on for the kids who have been there. And that churn slows down the ability of the entire classroom to move forward.
A new federal education law signed into effect by former President Barack Obama goes into effect this year. Now, all states will be required to track chronic absenteeism. It's typically considered missing 18 school days or more. But Cleveland leaders found even missing 1 day a month made a difference. So they started a public relations blitz. The slogan, "Get to school, you can make it," was on billboards, posters, magnets, t-shirts, even grocery store bags. Everyone helped staff a daily phone bank. Board members, principals, bus drivers. They made 16,000 calls the first year.
The reason for the call is Jalen has missed 4 more days of school, and good attendance helps.
Keisha Bullard is a kindergarten teacher.
Is there anything that we can do to assist you? In the past hour, for instance, I think that I've dialed maybe 20 numbers, 30 numbers.
Low-income families in particular face many challenges.
With the weather being like it is asthma. Most of the time it is transportation or illness issues.
Laurie Hobson, who's in charge of attendance for the district, found lots of kids miss school simply because they don't have clean clothes.
We provide uniforms to any family who needs a uniform, and what we discovered was attendance improves for as much as 6 weeks after receiving a uniform.
Cleveland schools partner with several organizations to help provide families with everything from a bus pass to emergency shelter to legal help. This makes sense, Chang says, because the school district can't solve deeper social problems on its own.
When you have high levels of chronic absence, often it means that there are these bigger challenges, and you really need to have a community approach to address it.
In Cleveland, it's an all-out effort. A community college offers scholarships as incentive, local businesses check attendance before hiring, and the Cleveland Browns players visit schools regularly.
Whenever you're late, that means you don't have respect for the other person's time. In the NFL, you get fined. So I think our fine, if you miss a meeting, might be like $10,000.
Welcome, everyone. We have a full agenda, so I'm not going to.
Some districts do use punishments such as fines, jail time, and taking away driver's licenses. But Cleveland schools have found focusing on positive messages far more effective.
We show up every day and associate Cleveland students, even when it's cold outside. Get to school, Cleveland. We know you can make it.
In the last 2 years, Cleveland's chronic absenteeism rate has dropped from 50 to 30%. At Cleveland High School for Digital Arts, Principal Jasmine Mays and a local radio celebrity are hosting a surprise celebration because students have made their attendance goal.
You never know when DJ Incognito's going to show up and just come and throw us a party.
Ninth grade is another year when students are most likely to miss school, but today everyone is glad they're here.
That's actually the icing on the cake, Z107.9 being here.
It's cool because it brings everybody together, like it's something unexpected.
I think it motivates kids to come to school because they don't want to miss cool stuff like this.
Eric Gordon is the CEO of Cleveland Schools. He says they've moved from rewarding perfect attendance to recognizing students who come to school regularly. Someone watching might say, really, a party just for coming to school? Like, isn't that what kids are supposed to do?
Well, yes, it is what kids are supposed to do. I would challenge people to look at their own workplace environments, though, where companies give bonuses for all kinds of things, including high attendance, where they have parties for their staff for performing well. I mean, incentive is part of how you create behaviors.
In Cleveland, thousands more children now attend classes regularly, but a third of the district is still missing 18 days or more of school, and Gordon says it'll continue to take a lot of effort. For PBS NewsHour and Education Week, I'm Kavita Kaduza in Cleveland, Ohio.
Well, an update to our education story from a couple of weeks ago on the teacher strike in West Virginia.
Hi everyone, I'm Shelly Ellis. I'm the Deputy Superintendent of Student Support at the State Department of Education. And as I'm seeing people logging on, I'm seeing so many friends, and I just want to say thanks for being here and that I miss you all tremendously. And I really long for the days that we can all be together in person and have these really critical conversations. We like to start this presentation listening to this video. It's a little bit dated, especially because it was pre-pandemic, but I think some of the reasons that your students miss along with COVID still remain true today that we see in the video. So we'd love to hear what resonated with you as you watched this video, or did anything surprise you? A lot of people think, well, we don't have anything in common with Cleveland, Ohio, except the fact that they've now got Baker Mayfield, and we used to have him at the University of Oklahoma. But I think when I first saw this, I started to think about, it resonated with me in terms of the students that I served as a principal at a middle school in Norman. And so there were a lot of similarities. A couple of things that really surprised me was when I heard that you can have a 90% average daily attendance and still have a quarter of your students missing a month or more of school. And so that's a really shocking statistic to me. So that really surprised me. And what resonated with me was the statement that the kindergarten teacher made on the phone, which was, is there anything we can do to assist you? So how can we as the school assist you as a family to get your child there? So Sonia, jump in if you're seeing anything in the chat before we move on.
Yeah, so the positive incentives worked better than the negatives is one of the comments, and just about the positive, the rewards or the systems in place to recognize and strengthen those that are doing well and to model that, I think. Yeah, so those are the main comments that I'm seeing, Shelly.
Great. Well, remember to pop any questions or thoughts you have in the chat. Lesa and Sonia and I are so used to really interactive conversations around this topic, and we want to be able to do that as much as possible in this virtual environment. So some things that we'd like for you to be thinking about as we go through this presentation is, when I was a principal or a counselor, when I would go to presentations and they would talk about certain things, I could see certain kids or certain families in my mind as they were speaking about it. So when you think about your students that are chronically absent, in your mind, what barriers do you see for those students? Like, why do you think they're not coming to school? I also want you to think about, what are you currently doing to improve attendance rates? Because this has been a topic of conversation for some time. Someone posted in the chat earlier, chronic absenteeism is an issue for everyone, and that's 100% true. From urban to suburban to rural to low socioeconomic status to high socioeconomic status, there's not a school that seems to be immune from chronic absenteeism. And then what do you think is already working? Because I promise your colleagues on this call would love to hear what you're doing that works. I always loved hearing from my peers on what they were doing and why it was working. So be thinking about those few things as we go forward.
Shelly, I would just jump into that. Yeah, more people are typing in the chat now too, talking about one, the media blitz. And I did find that interesting also in that, in particular, their ability to bring in the community partners into that discussion. So can you imagine the impact? We saw, the football players there, but also if you think about, if someone goes to church on Sunday and there's a discussion in church about that, about, kids in school and the support that they can provide. If there's some, even in some of our rural communities, some kind of a small piece on Main Street that talks about that also. And those players don't have to be professional football players. I mean, think about the high school team coming in to talk with the younger students. That not only builds the younger students, but also it puts that responsibility back on those high school students also to be setting that example. So I think that there's a lot of conversation here about the use of the positive message and the powerful words that how can we assist you?
That's great. Thanks, Sonia. And yeah, we're all about figuring out how to bring those community partners to the table because, like Hetty Chang said on the video, a school cannot solve all of the world's social problems. And so we have to have those partners help us do that. You all are tasked to do so much already. Okay, thanks, Lesa. Next slide. So when we talk about barriers, there's a lot of myths around that, and that is it's only a problem if they're unexcused. And that's not true, because when we think of chronic absenteeism, we're not just thinking about, a kid who misses less than 10 days or less than the 18 days, or, well, it was excused, they were sick. I mean, anytime a student is gone, they're missing instruction. And that's really what chronic absenteeism is about, is the missed instruction time. And quite frankly, and now we know for sure with so much virtual instruction, it's the loss of relationships between teacher and student to student. And so unexcused are not the only problems. Missing just 2 days a week can affect learning. And sporadic absences definitely are a problem, and attendance only matters in the older grades. That's a big myth as well. So a lot of times the barriers that we see are a lack of access to health or dental care, chronic illness, trauma. And we know there's a lot of trauma, adverse childhood experiences in our state. In a lot of areas, there's no safe path to school. So if a student misses the bus or doesn't have opportunity to ride the bus, they're not going to walk because they don't feel safe. And a lot of times involvement with child welfare of juvenile justice systems. It's also hard for students to want to come to school if they feel like they're struggling academically or socially, if they're being bullied, if there's ineffective school discipline that's very exclusionary. And I found this one to be really true as a principal and a counselor and teacher, and that's if parents have had a negative school experience. It's really hard to engage a parent in a positive way if their entire schooling was negative themselves. They never expect anything positive to come out of a meeting at school, or an undiagnosed disability. And then we have a lot of kids that are just disengaged. They feel like there's a lack of culturally relevant instruction or engaging instruction, that there's no meaningful relationships with adults in school. Just lots of reasons that I don't have to read all of those to you. But as you can see with those myths, barriers, aversion, and disengagement, a lot of times we think, well, there's really nothing we can do about chronic absenteeism. But looking at those, there really are things we can do. And we all know that meaningful relationships has the most impact on students in coming to school and achieving academically, all of the things that matter.
And we know that during this time when learning has been in different models, we've had hybrid, we've had total distance learning, we've had face-to-face, that it's been even more difficult, and that there may be some more barriers like no connectivity and maybe just complete lost contact with a student that was chronically absent at the end of last year, and then we haven't been able to make contact with them at all this year. So we're thinking about that, and you mentioned that in your early chats. The amount of lost learning time that some students have had is really pretty high at this point, which is why I'm just so excited that you're all here so that we can kind of come to common understandings and have some strategies that we can work across Oklahoma. This is a new resource from Attendance Works that's linked here, and it's strategies for connecting with families. It includes even a tool for home visits if that's something that you're interested in doing. And I know that at the beginning of the pandemic and a lot of the meetings that I was in, schools were doing some really wonderful and creative things in terms of how they were tracking this. And if you want to take a moment to put in the chat box some of those things that you've done this year during COVID that maybe are new, to just share those ideas that seem to be working for you in your districts. I did see a lot of, on the news, they did the drive-by and the teacher parade so that they could go be visible to their students. And that was getting a lot of very positive press. And think about that in terms of building that relationship with that parent. Now, I come from a home that was low socioeconomic, and my mother was a high school dropout. So school wasn't necessarily a safe place for her. And imagine she would be brought in and sat at a small chair with 4 teachers opposing her to talk about, I know this might be hard to believe, but perhaps to talk about a behavior that I might have exhibited that may have needed to have some attention from the parent side. And she was so intimidated by that. And think about that in terms of me. If I would get up in the morning and go, well, I really don't feel like going to school. And if mom didn't really think school was a very positive place, then she might not be as encouraging to me. So when we're really thinking about building those relationships with the parents, that was one of the really cool things I saw coming out. We have something in the chat. They said we're creating an elementary summer school this year, and it's based on student interest and having a positive school experience instead of just academic. It'll also incorporate SEL, social and emotional learning. So that's a really good way to maybe bring those kids back that have been disengaged off and on during this time. Something else that we're seeing is that it's been difficult to manage this year due to the changes in the learning curves for technology. I find that parents of the youngest of our students have the most difficulty and motivation because they're seeing, it feels like a lot of screen time. I know my own grandsons, my grandchildren are both in distance learning, and my daughter-in-law has been helping them with that. And she talks about how exhausting that's been for her to manage those online platforms. And so thinking about how we're able to support those kinds of things as well. And I know you guys are doing really heroic work around that.
Lesa, I would also share that there's some recent research out by Learning Heroes that's talking about what families are looking for as students return, and in particular, what they're looking for this summer and during the out of school time hours. And one of the things that they're talking about is, and Michelle, you'll be happy to hear this, talking about your incorporation of SEL, that is the parents' number one concern, is that their students have opportunity for support in those social and emotional areas of their development. And although they have academics up there as a piece of that work, I do think that it's really important that whatever we're designing as we look at this return, and I won't call it to normal, just a return, that is what families are looking for. And then they also did some work with and some research with our teachers across the country. And that was also the message that they had from the teachers, is that that's their number one concern with their students, is really that support that's needed. So I think you're right on target, Michelle, with what you're talking about there.
Yeah, I was going to say, I would just piggyback on what Sonia said, and I feel like that summer school scenario that Michelle just talked about is a really great way to bridge what has been a chaotic school year. No matter how much you all are working, there have been so many things out of your control that have, partial online, partial in person, A/B schedule. And so just returning to potentially full-time in learning, to know that there's thought about bridging that with your students and families is wonderful. And so if you look at this model, there's really 4 things around your conditions for learning that can actually impact regular attendance. And I think this is what I would be, as a principal, this is what I would be thinking about, of how can I get my staff ready for this? How can I communicate to my parents that our space is physically and emotionally healthy and safe? How am I going to help their children feel like they belong and they're connected and they have support, as well as the families? And what will the academic challenge and engagement look like? And how are we going to support adult and student social and emotional competencies? So I will say that in the Office of Student Support, we are currently working on social and emotional learning competencies, or best practice competencies, for PK through 12 and adults. And it's going to come with an implementation guide, and that should be launched this summer. And so it's a wonderful resource. Our team's been working very hard on that. And I think that can really help support not only your families and students, but your teachers as well. I know everyone is so exhausted, and I just commend you for what you do every day. But those are things that you all can start having conversations about. And like Sonia said, what does that look like in the summer as before we return? What does that look like in the after school space as well? And how can we connect what we're doing in all areas to what we do in school? And just remembering, I can't say it enough, and you all know that relationships are essential. That's the number one thing for students and families.
And that's why, in the accountability system, that is why we measure attendance from grades kindergarten through grade 12. And acknowledging that absenteeism is a leading indicator and cause of educational inequality. And if we can't get them there, then they can't make progress, they don't perform, and they're less likely to graduate. So that's why we call it a leading indicator. And that's where this one is being measured. And it's directly related to those engagement practices that you're so good at putting in your schools and building those positive relationships. And as they've mentioned, in this heroic time, you guys are doing great things. We want to help you out a little bit. So we do have attendance data available on the public dashboard, and that allows us to do some comparisons and to, like when we're working with our community members, to show our data and to talk about, use that as a framing point. How can we all work together to improve things? Because if we can get some kids coming more regularly, it's a win for us all. This is what we currently had at the state. Now we've had 2 report cards, 2017-18 and 2018-19, and these are state levels. And you can see we were pretty steady, 86.5% and 85.97%. What this means is that 86.5% of our students were in regular attendance. That means that they did not miss 10% or more of the instructional days offered through the school year. At the bottom, you see the distribution graph, and that shows how all of the schools across the state were performing. So you can see we were at the state level, we were at the lower end. The cool thing about this distribution graph that I really like is you can click on any of these bars and it'll open a window that will show you what those schools were. So you can think about, are some schools having some success? And if so, let's reach out to them and let's share those best practices. When we're looking at student groups, we think about that cultural relevance. That was one of the aversions. And we want to look at those student groups and think about, are the strategies that we have in place working for all students, or are there some groups that they're not working as well for? And if so, what kinds of questions do we need and what kinds of interventions might we want to put into place? So again, thinking about, I know a trend is usually 3 years, but we can do a comparison between 2018 and 2019 and think about, was there something different that we tried in 2019 that caused this improvement? And this is the state data. And I have to say, we only improved in terms of the American Indian population. So what kinds of things happened here? And I'm going to think it's partnerships with our tribes that really helped, maybe with an absenteeism campaign that boosted that from 81.9% to 85.7%. All of the rest of them stayed fairly steady. A couple of them dropped a little bit. This is all available on the dashboard by clicking on this little people icon. It opens up a page that shows you the breakdown by the different student groups. And these are the student groups that we measure in ESSA. And so when we're thinking about those interventions, are they targeted? Are they meeting the needs of all of our groups? And if you haven't yet taken time to look at this data, then it's right there on our public dashboard. One of the things that we can think about also is from year to year. Now we can look at this 2 ways. We can look at it within the same grade span, like this group of kindergartners. This group of kindergartners that were kindergartners in 2018. Then look what happened to the kindergartners in 2019. I know that each student group is a little bit different and comes with its own unique challenges. But something happened where we dropped that rate of attendance in our kindergartens by about 5%. So we might want to think here at the state level about what kinds of supports and things we have for that kindergarten grade level. Some positive things that came out when we looked at cohort. And why do we look at it by grade level? Because grade levels truly do matter. What we know about students that miss school in those early grades is that they're less likely to read by grade 3. What we know about those students that are missing in grade 6 is that they're less likely to graduate. So there are some trends that we look at. Notice that our attendance peaks here in those middle grades, and then it drops back off. We did get a really nice bump here in high school. And I noticed that I think in 2019, we started requiring ICAP and thinking about that connection between what I want to be when I graduate really helps tie that. Why do I have to go to Algebra 1 class? So perhaps that's part of what we're seeing here in terms of that bump up. It's just introducing to students to those career planning tools and helping them connect what they're doing at school with what they want to be. So we go from, you can go this grade 9, those guys became grade 10. So you can compare between grade levels or across grade levels. So we can look at year to year, or we can look at a cohort. Now then, you'll have data this year that you'll be able to put into your system that you can think about that period of time as well. And I'm going to show you where that, we'll show you where that data is here in just a moment. We did want to show you, in case you've not been to the public dashboard, this is how you find this information. You go to oklaschools.com. You use the search bar to type in your school. You go to, this is, you put the absenteeism data that's not associated with the letter grade. This one is the contextual data. Why I did that is because this includes all of your students that extend beyond FAE, and it also includes a few more student groups that we don't see on the report card. Then I looked at attendance. I can click these little icon of people, and it pops up that window that allows me to look at this data by student group. And think about how powerful that is when you're working with your community partners. And you can say, hey, look at what's happening. We've got really, we might have a problem here with our Black students. What is it that we can do? What changes can we make to help encourage that group of students to come to school? And so that's why we start looking at those different student groups and thinking about how those interventions that we have in place can be targeted to better meet the needs of that group. Where do you access this? You would access this on oklaschools.com. That is our public dashboard, and that's accessible and available to anyone in the state of Oklahoma or even outside of the state of Oklahoma. We actually have people even from other countries that are looking at our dashboard. So it provides a wealth of information to start conversations. It's part of the story. It's not all of the story. Any questions on what we've talked about so far? Or are you ready to dive into what can we do?
Thanks, Lisa. I think that access to the data is so exciting, and to be able to let data kind of drive our decisions. So now we'll talk about what is it we can actually do about chronic absenteeism. So if you were able to attend the, you can go to the next slide. I'm sorry, Lisa. If you were able to attend the 4th annual Trauma Summit, this year in February, it was called Awareness to Action. So what we were looking at in that conference was, we know our students have challenges. We know that Oklahoma is a state that has a lot of adverse childhood experiences. A lot of our students come to us with trauma, and we were very well aware of the why behind what we need to do. And so we moved from that awareness of knowing about trauma to the action, where Heather Forbes talked to us about the language of trauma and some really great classroom strategies. And I'll just put a plug in there that if you weren't able to attend that, it is on our Awareness to Action website, on our OSDE website, and you can watch the entire presentation by Heather. Then we moved into what can we do about it? And we believe what we could do about it is using a multi-tiered system of support with 3 tiers. In tier 1, all students receive universal support, and in tier 2, some students, and in tier 3, few students. If you'll excuse me, my daughter's working and she just walked in, so I'm going to shut my door. I'm so sorry, hang on.
And I just placed the Awareness to Action link that has the Heather Forbes presentation, but it also has several other presentations that are available to you. I just placed that in the chat for everybody.
Thank you, Sonia, and I apologize about that. So yes, so then we had Dr. Don Miller and Dr. Amy McCart talk to us about what is an equitable MTSS system. And so you can go to the next slide, Lisa. Attendance Works also uses a multi-tiered system of support around chronic absenteeism, but they just kind of flip the pyramid so that you remember you really have to focus on tier 1 first, and that's the universal, and it's the lowest cost. So this is these are the approaches that affect all students: the engaging school climate, positive relationships with students and families, monitoring your chronic absenteeism data, which means you're not looking at that 90% ADA, you're looking at every individual student. So you're looking on the micro level. And so when you think about students missing less than 5%, they're satisfactory. If they start to miss between 5 and 9%, then they're starting to be at risk. When they miss 10 to 19%, which is moderate chronic absences, then they can move into tier 2, which is early intervention. So they're getting everything in tier 1, but you're also offering that personalized early outreach like Cleveland was doing with their phone bank. You're developing an action plan to address barriers and increase engagement. And so there was one school in Oklahoma that looked at their chronic absenteeism data and decided who were those students that were missing the most school. The next year during enrollment, they just set up one extra station during the enrollment process if you were a student who had been chronically absent. And they met with the assistant principal, but the conversation started with, we noticed you had some barriers to attending last year. What can we do to help you be here? Because we really miss you when you're gone. That was a completely different tone of conversation, and they had a significant increase in chronic absenteeism from that one conversation at the beginning of the year, setting up that relationship. Caring Mentors is another great program for tier 2. Once you hit tier 3, that's when they're missing 20% or more of school. And this is severe chronic absenteeism. And that's where those community partners need to come to the table, and you need a coordinated school and interagency response to that. And I want you to notice that the legal intervention is the last resort. You know, there are truancy courts, there are school resource officers, but I much more advocate for the relationships and breaking down barriers before we move into legal intervention. So that's their multi-tiered system of support approach in the chronic absenteeism world. Okay, Lisa, thanks. So let's talk tier 1. So we went over a little bit about that. So that's really those engaging strategies. It's effective messaging, and that's for everyone. And removing those barriers to good attendance and improving your school climate. A lot of times at my middle school, I had students who lived out by Lake Thunderbird, and if they missed the bus, they literally could not come to school because their parents didn't have gas money to afford to bring them into town. And so that was a barrier for many of our students. And I'll be really honest, we never really solved that. We brainstormed for a long time. How could we get a van? And looking back, it probably would have helped us to partner with someone who had access to a van, a church or another community organization. Okay. Some sample strategy. The Attendance Works has an attendance playbook that is amazing. And so you can download this for free from Attendance Works. All of their resources are free to you. They are shareable, they are downloadable and printable, anything that you need. But I love this tier 1 sample strategy of nudging parents and students, just reminding them. Home visits are great. Healthy school buildings, which we know is going to be huge as we come back from a pandemic, and letting people know that it is safe. I love the laundry at school idea. I had an 8th grade student who was very challenging behaviorally and missed a lot of school. And what we found out when we finally got him to have a one-on-one conversation with us was that he very rarely had running water at his home. And it was easier to misbehave and come sit in my office than to have to sit by his peers and have them make snide comments about his clothes or how he smelled. And so we just did something a little bit different. When he got to school every morning, he had access to the gym locker room. We had purchased a personal hygiene kit for him, and he would go into the locker room and he would shower there, put on clean clothes, bring us his dirty clothes. We would wash the clothes in the Family and Consumer Sciences classroom, And so once we did that, he was like a new kid. His behavior improved, his attendance improved, his grades improved. And that really was just thinking about it differently. I also love restorative discipline practices. We started looking at that when I was an assistant principal at the middle school. And I had a student who was in 8th grade, and I was the 8th grade assistant principal, and we had a little snack machine at the time, and his friend's food wouldn't come out. So he decided that he would move back, run into it, put his shoulder into it, hit the machine to jar it loose. Well, of course, he shattered the entire front facing of the machine. So, you know, vandalism, destruction of school property. And so I got with my other assistant principal and my head principal, and we started talking about, we can't just suspend kids all the time. And if we're serious about restorative discipline practices, what does this look like? So I wound up calling the Coca-Cola company who owned the machine and told them what happened. And they said, oh, we'll just fix it. And I said, I know, but I need an estimate of how much it would cost. And so they told me, so I called the dad and had a conversation with the dad and the son. And we determined through conversation with dad that it would be better for his son to stay after school and work off the cost of the machine repair than to be suspended. That student became such a fan of our school and our administration. And even when he went to high school, he was around the same age as my personal children. Every time I saw him at a sporting event or an open house, he ran straight up to me to tell me how well he was doing in high school, how proud I would be of him. And his dad always did the same thing too. So it's that relationship piece and thinking differently.
And something that I really like about the attendance playbook is it gives you the effectiveness. You know, in essay, they ask for the effectiveness, and it tells you whether it's promising, whether it's emerging, so that you can really prioritize and think about what strategies that you have in place. In the chat, I'd like you to think about, are there some tier 1 strategies that you're doing, the tier 1 are for all students, that you want to share with others, especially during this time of COVID? What's something that might look different under this pandemic than prior to that? Or what is something that you were having great success with in your school prior to COVID as well? So if you just want to drop some tier 1s into the chat, let's share those great things that we're doing across our schools.
And Lisa, while people are typing, I'll just share one that I've seen with one of the schools that I work with. Was they were doing curbside connections. So these were opportunities for them to go out and visit students and families, just kind of those porch visits on their home, maybe take them an activity or an idea or something to share. I think that oftentimes we think about these home visits or curbside connections for those students being more of a tier 2 or tier 3 opportunity, but what they really found was by offering those at a tier 1 for almost all of the students, it really built that connection and that expectation for student attendance at what they did have offering during the pandemic, more important for everyone. And there is research that talks about that with home visits and with curbside connections, that it shouldn't just be for students maybe who are struggling, that it should be something that's a practice overall. That program, in a little bit over a month's time, about 6 weeks, that district did almost 1,200 curbside connections. And that is something that they want to be able to continue on after the pandemic, is what they've decided. It was so successful.
That's really powerful. And, you know, I see on here school-based health services. I remember, and some of you know this about me, some of you will learn this about me. I had the honor of serving in Northwest Ardboro School District, which is in rural Alaska. And one of the things that we made sure of, because in rural Alaska, if you have to go to the doctor, then you have to fly out and probably into Anchorage. So we used a lot of telehealth, which has become very popular here. But we also made sure that we had things like our physicals to play sports. Were there, we would have a doctor fly into the villages so that those could be offered on campus. And I know here in Oklahoma, we do that a lot as well. So thinking about those kinds of things that you can do, because not only did that increase attendance because kids didn't have to miss to do that, it also built that relationship with families that the school was there as part of the service. And I am thinking that, you know, just those visits where you looked at the Wi-Fi's, and there was a district that put buses in places that had the Wi-Fi's for better connections. Those would all be examples also of tier 1 interventions during this time as well. Are you ready for tier 2? Now, tier 2 are students that have missed a little bit.
Yeah, so we're talking about students that have missed 10 to 19%. And so these are the personalized early outreach. And I'll brag on someone that's on this call right now, and that's Michelle Strange. She was actually a counselor in the building where I was a principal, and she actually set up a mentoring program with community members, and she would take them through the FERPA training, and she was very careful with how she paired mentors with students and the amount of time that they had to spend with those students. So carrying mentors that are your community members is huge, and they would meet with the students at the school, and we saw great results from that. And I think that personalized early outreach that I talked about earlier, being aware of who you see as being at risk as you start school next year, just set that early to let parents and families know that you want the students at school. Some examples are the early warning systems, and Lisa's shown you a lot of the data that you can get from Oklahoma schools, and she's got more to show you, I think, later. Mentors, making sure that you're addressing chronic illnesses such as asthma. If you have students with asthma in your school and you're seeing them have high attendance issues, high chronic absenteeism, it could be a filtering issue in your school, and those are all things to be thinking about. So there are a lot of different things around tier 2 within the attendance playbook as well. And then tier 3, these are your students that are really missing. Oh, sorry, Lisa, go ahead. You're on mute.
That is the catchphrase for 2020-21, right? Woodward has been in person all year long, and they're using a program called School Status that allows their teachers to connect with parents via text messages and phone calls from their cell phones. So that's probably beginning at that tier 1 intervention. So they're making those connections with parents. And then once you've made those positive connections with parents, I always find that it's easier to make those more difficult connections with parents because you've already built that relationship. So great job, Woodward.
The other thing that I would share about that, Lesa, is again with Learning Heroes, there's quite a bit of research about how families want to be contacted and want to be connected. And one of the main ways that they talk about is text messaging, that's easier for them. And so having systems like that in place to be able to keep their information up to date for teachers is also helpful. So there is, again, the research behind that, Jerry, to show that that's a good system.
And a text message just seems a little less invasive than that phone call because I can look at a text message in my own time, right? Now let's talk tier 3.
So those are your students that are really missing a lot of school, 20% or more. And again, that's that coordinated interagency response. A lot of times, these are higher cost interventions. And so again, that's why it's really important to pair with like your social services, health authority, housing authority, all of those agencies that we really need to have at the table. It also may be partnering with the Department of Human Services or Department of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, and really trying to get to the core of the issue with our tier 3 students. And so again, next slide, there is information in the attendance playbook about those tier 3 interventions that you can do for students. And, a lot of times you'll find that they're absent a lot because there's no daycare for younger students. And so they may have to be the caregivers because if parents don't go to work, they don't get paid. And so there are programs through DHS that can help with childcare. And if families aren't aware of those things, then it's hard for them to coordinate everything with the family. So those are resources that you can point your families into that direction.
And I do want to point out, it says truancy court redesign. I'm going to let you go into the attendance playbook to kind of dig into more about what that is. But one of the things that they really did in that was that they used a mentor system instead of what you would traditionally see in a truancy court. So when we're talking about truancy court, that is that more positive messaging, because we really want to build those relationships and make school a welcoming place for our students. Because it's, and these habits also carry into the workforce. I think you saw that from those football players. They said if they were 10 minutes later missed a meeting, they were fined $10,000. And I watched that young man's face go, wow, I can't even imagine making $10,000. So attendance is not just important at school, but it's also important in work. And I think that that's another piece of that information to think about.
So this is just another, another look at that flipped pyramid for the multi-tiered system of support approach to attendance. So there, I'm going to let Lesa start talking about the resources that we have and that early warning system that I mentioned earlier.
So this is in your single sign-on account. And I really wish we'd have had this built when chronic absenteeism first came out, because I believe it would have helped us all. I know that many of you already have something within your system that you're able to monitor attendance with, but we now have that in single sign-on. It's available for everyone that has an account. Now, the accounts are issued by your district, by your superintendent. So to be able to see your data, you need to talk with your superintendent if you're not already able to see that. Something brand new that's just recently been added is when you go into the school level data, you can look at your school calendars, but you have right in front of you any given time your average enrollment, your average absences, and your average attendance rates. And this is on a daily basis. This updates every single evening. And you'll notice this one, there are a couple of school calendars within here. So there's a school calendar for alt ed, they have their high school calendar, and then they have their co-op site calendar. I can click view on any of these calendars, and it presents a page that looks like this. So what this shows me is what's happening on that daily rate. This is all students. So this would be a place that I could think about my tier 1 interventions. Are there times during our school year where we have lots of kids missing? And if so, what are some things that we can do about that? And this system allows you to do that. I know that Tulsa Impact did a lot of work on this. One of the things they found when they have those 3-day breaks, students were missing those other 2 days. So they then revised their school calendar, and they no longer have 3-day breaks. They just have week breaks, and that did improve their attendance. Remember, I'm from the Arctic. Subsistence, caribou hunting season. Here it's deer hunting season. A lot of our families rely on that for food. So if we have lots of absences during hunting season, that might be a good time to have a teacher professional development day or something else in place of that. When I worked at Pullman City prior to being in the Arctic, it took us way too long to figure out that we should probably have a teacher professional day on the day that all of our students got that free fare ticket, right? And that blessed the teachers too, because the last place we wanted to be is at the fair where all of our students were. So it gave us an opportunity to have our space and allow our students to have their space as well. So this school calendar data can be pretty powerful when we're looking at this in real time. Yellow indicates that you might have a problem in how your data is feeding in. And so you might want to look at how it's being coded in your student information system. And that guidance is through the Office of Data. Even drilling down further in this early warning system, I can then go to the student data. The student data allows me to click on a student's STN and get the history. And why I really like this is the history of all of their attendance in all of public schools in Oklahoma. So where in your system, you might just have what happened to them when they've been in your school. If you have students that have been migratory over the period of they've gone to many schools, then you can look to see kind of what their history is. This helps us dig into those barriers. Is this a new problem that's just arisen this school year? Or has this been a consistent problem with this student? And if so, what barriers might there be to having that student come to school more regularly? And what are some supports and things that we can put into place? And this is how you filter that. So it looks like I got my slides a little backwards. So thank you for letting me go back in time so I can go forward, kind of like the springing forward, right? Still missing my hour. I need you all to understand that. The student attendance display on the student data, I can filter right here for the absence rates. Remember, 10% or more is considered chronically absent, and it's 10% or more of the days that they were enrolled. So here you see that this student's only been enrolled 9 days, but they've missed 27.76%. Something's going on right there. And if we watch this early on, we can figure what that might be out. Perhaps maybe they're having connectivity issues, and it could be something as simple as figuring out how we can get them connected to a hotspot or find a library or a place that has public access, right? If we're in a remote learning, if they're coming to school, maybe it is like Dr. Ellis said, maybe they're missing the school bus and they don't have any other way to come. So thinking about that, then I can click on any of those students and look to see what this history is. I can also click on view the calendar, and that will give me an understanding of what it looks like in terms of how they're missing. So when I'm thinking about that, why is that important? Are they missing all at once? Because that could be due to an illness. Are they missing once or twice a month? And the thing that when Hetty Chang came and talked to us here at the agency that really stood out to me was the statement that she made that students that miss 2 or more days a month are at risk of being chronically absent. And having been a teacher for a long time, I could close my eyes and I could think about a lot of those students that missed just 2 days a month. A lot of them I understood why they were missing. And I always regret not understanding why all of them were missing, because 2 or more days a month, they're missing instructional time. And especially when we're thinking about our high school kids and those math classes, that builds up. We're thinking about those kindergarten kids, they're missing those literacy and numeracy skills that they need to move forward because they're missing the very basis of foundations of knowledge. So those patterns, and I can tell you from when I was in 11th grade, I was in a car accident and it resulted in a cervical spine sprain that put me in the hospital for 6 weeks. So I missed 6 weeks of school. I came back to school. My math teacher told me not to even bother trying to catch up because I didn't have the capacity to do the math and she didn't have the time to help me with it. Now then, I got moved to another math class because I talked with our school counselor and we decided that probably wasn't the best learning environment for me. But I ended up still graduating with honors because all of my other teachers worked with me. I will admit to you that I still kind of have a math barrier today because I still hear that you can't do math, which is why I went into physics and chemistry and got to write Miss Mayo a wonderful letter expressing to her how well I had done in physics and chemistry and thanking her for all of her support and help in making me try harder so that I could disprove her disbelief in me. So that was a nice letter to write. But 6 weeks of school is significant. Now then, I would have shown up in this red tab. And then you could have thought about what could be happening. I'm in the hospital, I'm receiving therapy. So it really was a matter of homebound services probably wouldn't have worked in that instance. But coming back to school, I spent a lot of time with all of my other teachers who helped me. And I'm sure that you can think about students and what's going on and getting to their story. And that's what chronic absenteeism really is all about. It's about those relationships. It's about understanding lost instructional time. And I can tell you another story. A teacher friend of mine said she missed a week when they were in 2nd grade. That happened to be the time that they were learning to read analog clocks. She still struggles with reading analog clocks. And just reading an article the other day, maybe all of our 2nd graders are missing because I think that I read that they're thinking of taking analog clocks out of buildings because students can't read them anymore. So thinking about what's happening in our instruction and how we can catch kids up when they come back and how we can help them be there when they're gone is really what this is all about. And that's why I get so excited about it.
Thanks, Lesa. Well, as educators, we are always involved in a continuous improvement cycle at a school, no matter where we think we may be or where our students may be. We always want to improve. And you can use this same type of continuous improvement cycle around your chronic absenteeism, using positive engagement, shared accountability, strategic partnerships, capacity building, and then that actionable data that Lesa has talked to you so much about, that is really easily available at your fingertips, either via single sign-on or Oklahoma Schools, or through your own student information system. And notice that the students and the families are right in the middle of that circle, and all of these supports surround them and your schools. Okay. So we're going to look at some self-assessment tools that are available via AttendanceWorks, and we also have them on our website around these 5 things in the continuous improvement cycle. So we can go to the next one. So in actionable data, you can look at this from a site level as well as a district level. And so these are already available, free to download and print, and you could have your team go through these questions individually prior to a meeting, and then come together and have a conversation about them. Are you really looking in real time every 2 weeks at your attendance data? Within our professional learning communities at our middle school, we started something called the 20, and that was my instructional coach's idea. And so we were looking at the 6th grade, the 7th grade, and the 8th grade. We were looking at our students who were hitting on the top 20 list of students with the most struggles for the previous week. We were looking at attendance, we were looking at grades, we were looking at referrals. And so we weren't missing kids on a weekly basis. We were doing the just-in-time data look. And so in those students that were hitting on the top 20, then we had quite a conversation about those students and what was going on. And sometimes it was as easy as their ELA teacher saying, oh, I've already called mom. Stephen had the flu. He'll be back next week. I've got him set up to come into my room at lunch for overtime on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Does anybody else need them? So it wasn't a hard plan to put in place, but it was a plan nonetheless, and we had to have that conversation. So you can kind of get a pulse on where you are in your actionable data. Positive engagement, same thing. You can really look at how are we doing in positively engaging our students. Do we have explicit attendance protocols for outreach to families when they begin to miss too much? Or is that a district policy, or is it different at every site, or are we even doing that? So you can really look at those 5 quick questions around positive engagement. The next one, capacity building. Again, have your teams fill these out prior to a meeting, and then have a discussion. And you can do, once if you're able to be in person, you can do a gallery walk where you're rating each question and why you're doing it that way, and then come to some kind of consensus. It really does help you know what you need to work on. And then the same thing on the next one with a shared accountability. So does our superintendent and school board set and publicize the district-wide goals for attendance? I mean, are we even talking about that in a public way? And they're really just great thought questions. This is the district template, but there is also site templates available. And the next one is strategic partnerships, and really looking at, do we have those cross-sector partnerships, and are they strong, or do we not know? Is that an urgent gap? Could we be better? But these are really great thought-provoking questions that really help guide you in developing that tiered system of support for chronic absenteeism, and more for regular attendance is what I like to say. Go ahead, Lesa.
Shelly, I would also put in there that as you're thinking about those assessment pieces, I was having kind of a side conversation with one of our participants just about the importance of thinking about who is looking at that information with you. It's important to remember that oftentimes your bus drivers are your first point of contact, your transportation team, your cafeteria staff. your custodial staff. Sometimes those are your early morning people there that are getting breakfast ready and have the kids coming in. And so this is really meant to, to really think about your team and how broadly you can throw kind of that net, and also engaging community partners in that initial discussion is important. I would share a story about a school in Northeast Oklahoma that I just talked with a few weeks ago that was having an issue with a child not only making it to school, but on days that they were at school, then getting picked up was a problem. And so the child's home was fairly easy to see from the school building. And so the teaching staff's idea was to have maybe someone, an aide, walk part of the way and watch the student go the rest of the way home, or meet that student in the morning to come across. And so they were kind of working through this whole plan and had a discussion with their transportation director, who said, although it looks really easy there, I've driven that and I've been there and I've done that. And he instead set up a route for that child to work, because they wouldn't typically get bus service because they are so close. But when they started to look at it, that field, it wasn't safe for the child to be coming across there. And there were real problems with that. So that transportation director, that teacher and program leader called me and she said, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I talked to my transportation director. And he was the one who said, oh no, we've got to figure this out. So I think making sure that we don't take it all on ourselves, but that we really lean in and depend on some of those other people. They are really, really good at their jobs and want what's best for those kids. And I think they want to be asked to be a part of those solutions.
I love that story, Sonia, and it made me think about a tier 2 intervention that we used a lot for various reasons: behavior, academics, attendance, and that was a check-in, check-out system. And that was just connecting the child with someone that they had a relationship with in the building, and they knew they were going to start and or end their day with that person every single day. And my administrative assistants did that, my coaches, my teachers, my school counselors, all the principals, my paraprofessionals. It really just depended on who had the relationship with the student, and that's who the check-in, check-out person was. And it does take everybody in the building for sure to be able to increase your attendance. I will just say really quickly, we have a great school climate transformation website under student support on OSDE, and it's got all kinds of resources from how to look at data, what are evidence-based best practices, what are some prevention models, what are sustainable systems, all around your school climate. And, as all the evidence-based showed from attendance works, that school culture and climate matters. I just wanted to throw that out there really quickly.
And I put that website in the chat again, Shelly.
And I am going to apologize. My battery is low and my computer is rebooting, and it has the presentation on it, but we will have this uploaded and we will have it sent out. So you'll have all of the links. And I think you saw that we did link some resources. We have a brand new attendance toolkit that has all of those interventions in place and has some other tools for you to think about which interventions you have in place and how those are working in terms of looking at your data. There were links to those surveys that Dr. Ellis showed. That's a good starting place if you haven't had those conversations. And there's also links to that school transformation page that we talked about, where you get these simple strategies like check-in and check-out, and those are very effective at our high school level. I worked with the school last year. One of the things that they did is they had a breakfast club. They really started with those kindergarten groups and monitored very closely, and had a breakfast club for those kids that were struggling with getting to school, where they had little donut holes and orange juice, and they invited the parents once a month to again build those relationships. Because if we can get them in the habit of coming to school in kindergarten, that habit carries on to first, second, and third grade. And so those are some things that are happening here in terms of what's going on. Is there any stories of success that you guys want to share while we have this opportunity to share across districts? And if you want to, put those things in the chat, or if you have any other questions. There's something that we didn't hit on that you're wondering about.
Lesa, we did have a question too in the chat about engage for the summer. And although it came to me kind of in a private message, I think that that's important for us to share with everyone here. We will be having an engage sessions this summer happening in June. And I'm certain that this will be, you know, again, one of the topics that will be covered there with more information, you know, for you as well. I've also put some of the websites in the chat for you that you can be linking to as well. And I think that the only slide that we had remaining, Lesa, was really just this quote. And if anybody, I know several of you have worked with me over the years, I'm a real quote person, have them around my house and in my office, and always start or end presentations with a quote. And the thing that I would say about chronic absenteeism is this is a quote often attributed to Helen Keller, but also to a couple of other folks. So it says, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do." And I think that that's, you know, for me, as I think through, for years, I've been looking at this chronic absenteeism issue on a number of fronts, from out of school time to family engagement to student support. And I think that, you know, I see that as people first come into the work, they're very overwhelmed. And I think that we all were before we had good data to react to. We felt that we couldn't impact this. This wasn't, you know, short of going to a child's home and dragging them out of bed in the morning and bringing them into our school, we often felt very, I think, frozen where we were with what can we do to impact this. And then the more we've worked with the attendance works groups and, you know, Hetty Chang, and the more we've really looked at the evidence and the research around this, there is evidence and there is research that there are things that we can do. And oftentimes those are very small tweaks in what we're doing. So I don't want people to feel overwhelmed by, you know, our multi-tiered systems of support and, you know, the 2 or 3 data sites. It's really about those taking the time, stepping back with, you know, a wide range of people from your organization, looking at those assessments and deciding that one piece that we're going to start to tweak, you know, to begin the work. So again, I hope that, you know, that's encouraging to you to know that, one, you're not alone. 2, that it can feel overwhelming to begin with, but we're here to support you in any of that work, and would be happy to visit with you or your team as you're starting to, you know, look more closely at your data and understand what's happening with those students. All of the slides will be available. Lesa, how will we send those out to folks? Where will they be?
Well, we will be posting those on the accountability homepage with the slides and the recording. And then we'll also be housing them in the Oklahoma Learning Platform, so that if you wanted to use information within this with the professional learning at your district, that you could do that as well. And of course, we can also send these slides out to you registered here through an email as well. And we do thank you so much for your time. Are there questions from folks? Is there something that we didn't hit up on that you're still just wondering about?
Well, we will stick around in case there are any questions. And thank you guys for spending time with us this afternoon. And we appreciate what each of you do every single day. Thank you.
And I did see a question from Karen Mock. Are there plans for a state campaign? Not that I'm aware of at this time, but it's certainly something that we can talk about and look at considering.